Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? We are mid-July 2024. How's your summer going? How was your 4th if you're in the United States? That is all I'm going to say. This is the first time that Jen and I had a chance to record together since we recorded episode 250, even though there's only one episode in between. There have been a few weeks in between. I think it's a great episode. We talk about some things that are going on with Jen. She didn't want to go into them in depth, which is totally fine. But this idea of not having needs, having hyper independence, needing to take up more space, masking to stay safe, hiding parts of ourselves. We talk about in our relationship, I had a big mad, then Jen had a big mad. And where we're at now, we're fine. But talking about how setting boundaries and having clear limits creates safety. And from my perspective, it's kinder when Jen is able to know what she can and can't do and to be clear about that. Part of what we talked about a little bit during the episode, and then we talked after we finished recording, is that sometimes she's not sure how much of the stuff that I'm struggling with do we talk about. And she said, I don't know, I think I'm okay. Maybe I'm not okay. And my inclination is to give her space, because maybe the I'm not sure is really, I don't think so. And so trying to navigate that. I also talk about having this experience of being more free and unmasking and moving and being more authentic. Jen and I talk about in our relationship, I think we've shown up as therapists, which are very neutral. And now we're kind of wanting to get a little bit more salty with each other, a little more authentic, and what that looks like. I think it's a great episode, and we had a really good talk, and then I had a really good cry afterwards, which maybe I'll tell you a little bit about in the outro, because there was something I also wanted to share. I wanted to say that there was a listener who listens on Spotify and listens to episode 247. The episode was about attachment and self-compassion, and I had mentioned the name Diane Poole, Poole, Heller, Heller, and she does a lot of attachment work. And I will put that in the show notes, and I will put a link to her work. Unfortunately, on Spotify, people leave comments, but I'm not able to respond to them. So I just wanted to circle back with that. I think that is it. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hey, Patricia. That feels like a trick question these days. I guess it always is, isn't it? It's like, do I give the just, I'm good, I'm fine, right? We're friends, right? So I know you always want an honest answer. And just to really put it out there, I'm not sure how much I'm feeling comfortable talking about today. So while I really want to show up here on the podcast with you, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
How are you, my friend?
In this moment, I'm doing pretty well. I feel like I have been up and down and really working through some of the hardest stuff I've ever worked through. We are recording at the end of June. You and I haven't recorded together since the beginning of June. So I've been stepping in and doing some solo episodes. And with the attachment things that are going on with me, the trauma, the OCD, it feels like what I was going to say is that you and I have been through the ringer, and I don't think that that's accurate, but I think that we've really had to work through some pretty big things in our relationship. And I know you don't want to talk about this, and I totally respect that. Are you okay if I just mention?
Yes. Thank you so much for asking. Yes, absolutely. It's funny. I feel like I have each foot in two different worlds, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is kind of riddled with a nervous system reaction that just kind of wants to freeze, feels disoriented, is like, ugh. And then another one where I'm like, of course, and this is very normal. This is very human. And I get excited that we're willing to talk about some of the things that are difficult about being in dynamic relationship, dynamic friendship with each other.
Mhm.
And so one part of me is like, oh my gosh, of course. Like, what am I being so jammed up about here? And then I have the part that's jammed up about everything here
Right.
and wanting to honor kind of like both sides of myself right now, both parts of me.
Sure.
So thank you so much for asking. And I guess I feel like mentioning in the background, you're very generous and gracious. And, even today, it's like, we don't have to. And it's funny how, like, obviously, I want to and don't want to at the same time.
Right.
And I'm feeling, I've felt this, I've been at this place before. I just want to normalize some of the journey, right? Where there are some twists in the road where I get, and I think any human being can get off kilter, disoriented. I just sort of want to hole up for a little while and yet, and if you can feel like everything's wrong and yet nothing's wrong.
Right. Right. Well, and I think depending on how we're wired, I think not we, you and I, although you and I do process differently, that oftentimes when I'm feeling very activated and I don't understand, I'm a verbal processor. So I want to talk about it and sort it out. And that feels comforting for me. I have been having these thoughts about like, I'm really sharing pretty vulnerably here. I definitely have, I think this is my autism and wanting to do things correctly and provide accurate information. And as I'm looking back over 350 plus recordings of this podcast, that as I started out saying I'm a highly sensitive person, and then I learned I'm autistic, and then I learned that I've got PDA, and now I've got trauma, and now I have OCD. So a lot of what I've talked about and named as one thing now is being named as something else. And as I'm 100 million% in the middle of this OCD journey, it feels like it changes from week to week. And I have this desire for accuracy and to what I tell you, the listener, as being accurate. And the truth and the reality is all I can do is share my reality and my truth from week to week, and that my story is unfolding. And what I say last week may not be accurate. It may not be true. It may change this week and it may change next week. And that's challenging for me because I was talking with an autistic colleague who has OCD and may come on the podcast, I'm not sure, but wanted to listen to the podcast. And I had this vulnerability like, what if my perception of OCD or the things that I struggle with is not accurate or correct? And I don't want to give out incorrect information. And what I always fall back to is what I'm really good about talking about is my personal experience. And maybe I'm using incorrect terms or labels, and things can change, but part of my process is giving permission for that to change in the moment, week to week. And I think your process is more about, and there's this thing of this is a public way that we're processing. And for some reason, I tend to be okay with it, but I keep having these thoughts like, why am I doing this? But even not given the podcast, I think other people want to sort it, filter it internally, and then once they've figured that out, come and share it. And you and I talk privately and not on the podcast. So there are lots of different ways that we sort through things, and it can really feel undoing when your sense of identity or something that you've really felt that you've understood now is being really shaken up. And it can feel very ungrounding and undoing to be in that place. And that happened for me around, when I learned I was autistic. It felt like my identity was a snow globe that got totally shaken up, and I didn't know what was up or down. And this last year, it's been great, and it's been really challenging.
Absolutely, right? Like that's the nature, I guess, of being dynamic. That's our nature, to change and to grow. And I mean, I know as therapist and coach, and we're here to help people change and to grow and shift. And just thinking about my kids, and I see them in the morning and they've grown 2 inches. It feels like right now, and we're verbs, not nouns, and to. But it is. I know that for me, this it's like we build these worldviews, right? We build these worldviews, and we build coping mechanisms around us. And I know one that I've talked about here on the podcast before is not having any needs
Mm-hmm.
and hyper independence. And lately, things have kind of come up for me to question that about myself and take more space. And I mean, one lens to look through might be masking, right? This is how I show up to stay safe, to hide parts of me that aren't comfortable, that feel really cozy behind that mask. And when you start anything new, it does feel vulnerable and uneasy and disorienting and unbalanced. And whether that's a skill or just a different dance, different dynamic. I know that also for myself, by the time I'm really talking about things, I have it really well digested. By the time I'm public facing with more stuff, it doesn't mean that there's not a lot going on in the background to get me there. It's just that's always so private for me that does feel hard and challenging to go there right now. So just naming it.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that we honor whatever our process is. I would never want you to share anything that you weren't sure about, that you weren't ready to share, that felt like, I don't know. Just because I have a way of showing up doesn't mean that's how everybody else needs to show up. I suspect, I could be wrong here, but I reached out to an autistic therapist who's been on another podcast, and I've been kind of looking, knowing that it's not always working for you and I to record. I want to do some autistic content.
Of course. Yeah.
And I really depend on somebody to bounce that stuff off of. So I reached out to someone, this is months ago, and they said that they wanted to listen to my podcast. I wanted to listen to the episode that they'd been on. Time went by, I didn't hear from them. So I circled back. They said they've been very busy. And then I didn't hear from them again. And that activated some of my rejection sensitivity, and whether they're just busy or not, I don't know. And that's why at the end of almost every episode, I say, like, you're not for everybody and everybody's not for you. And I think I have a story in my head, I don't know if it's true, that my sharing so openly may make people feel uncomfortable, and they may feel that the expectation is that they have to show up as vulnerably. My fear is that I share inaccurate information and people don't want to be associated with inaccurate information. But if I'm talking about my own experience, I don't see how inaccurate that can be, but that's one of my fears. And then I reached out to another autistic therapist, and I'm wanting to learn how to do autism assessments, not being licensed, but being unlicensed. And she told me that this person we talked about them coming on the podcast, was going to be doing a training on how to assess for autism. So in the same message chat that we had talked, that they kind of dropped the ball. That's how it feels to me. And I have to be sensitive. They're neurodivergent. They're autistic. They could be ADHD. They just may not track things very well, but my autism runs stronger in this. So my values are like, circle back, close the loop. Let me know what's going on. If it's not going to work, that's fine. Just let me know. But like being left hanging it's challenging for me. I manage it, and it's challenging. When I had to reach out to this person again, and it's in the same thread, and had some questions, are like, yeah, let me know if you have any questions. And it was the weekend. And so I did have questions. I said, I recognize it's the weekend. Please feel free to wait until the weekday to get back to me. And here we are, Friday. And I haven't heard anything. Part of my self-care is my value is to be with people that can communicate and respond. They don't have to meet my needs. They can say no, but that lack of responsiveness is challenging for me. And now this is the third time that I've interacted with this person with no follow through. I'm not going to take the training. That doesn't work for me. And so there is another training in the fall that I'll be taking. And part of what I'm sharing with you, the listener, is that we can't control people. People are going to show up the way that they show up. And I get to choose if I'm going to do business with someone, do their values align with mine, and is this going to work and is it not going to work? And this is not going to work for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for giving me that permission as well to kind of figure out what works, what doesn't. Although, again, part of my like inner discomfort is like, I feel like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So episode 250, you and I had talked on the podcast when I got really big mad at you, which for me was a huge thing, to feel safe enough to really get angry. Part of my unmasking, and I was just this is an adjacent comment to what we're talking about, is so much of the joy and spontaneity, I think, was just smashed out of me. So I was telling my husband today, like when I interrupt, one of my sons was here and we went out and I don't know, I was joking around with the person who was checking us out and my son got embarrassed and kind of tried to squash me. And that happens very frequently. And because I've been silenced so much, I don't want to be silenced anymore. And when this part of me that feels joy and connection with people comes up, I want to support that. And similarly, I'm a little nervous to share this because I've only done this with 2 clients and it was with consent. But when my son and his girlfriend were here, we were out and I found this kind of, it's sort of like a little koosh ball, but it's not. It sensory wise, it's very, very enjoyable to me. But the way that I enjoy it is you have to kind of throw it up and down because that's, if you just touch it, it doesn't do anything. And in my chair, I've been really wanting to kind of swing side to side, but I was trained as a therapist, like you don't move, you don't breathe, you don't do anything. And I had a client the other day and I, said, hey, I have this thing, like, look, and I'm throwing it, I'm throwing it on the screen and she can see what it is. And then I was kind of silly and I stretched it and put it over my face and she laughed. And I said, it's just kind of so fun. And I was bouncing in my chair, very animated, which is not how I typically show up. I'm very masked and controlled. She was fine with it. She's worked with kindergartners, first graders. And so I asked, how is it, if I'm swinging side by side, side to side on my chair? She said it was totally fine. I said, if at any point it bothers you, like, just look at me and I'll be like, oop, sorry. Mm-hmm. And she was totally fine with it. And then the next client that I had is a relatively new client. Both of these are autistic clients. And I started out saying, hey, how is it for you if I do this? And kind of gave the same speech. They were totally fine. I found myself so relaxed at the end of the session and so present and regulated because I allowed my body to move in a way that worked. It was with consent. I don't know if I would do it with all of my clients or not. But again, this is part of the unmasking for me and keeping myself regulated and giving clients permission. I mean, I always tell clients, show up in pajamas, show up in bed, eat during our sessions, get up and move around, whatever works for you. And I think this is how we also dismantle internalized ableism. And obviously, if I had clients that were not comfortable with this, I would not do it because my job is to be present for clients. But this is also part of the being so well socialized so that everybody else is comfortable to my expense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. You make me think of a client who said, I'm so comfortable making myself uncomfortable to make other people comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I think same client also told me, like, you can't say the wrong thing to the right people. And I'm thinking as you're speaking, like, you could, every once in a while we like redo websites and sort of freshen things up a bit. And I had this little picture of you rebranding yourself like the Wiggly.
The Wiggly therapist.
The Wiggly therapist. And then like the people would find you who were totally okay with that. And then if it does make you feel more refreshed, lighter, like sometimes it's funny. Another one of my favorite sayings is like, just like let life surprise you.
Yeah.
Right. I am so curious where some of these things go. I'm right in the middle of like the SHIT show right now, but I am really curious because sometimes when you get through it, you just feel either like a weight's been lifted or you get more energy or you move in the world a little bit differently. And again, it doesn't mean that the past 10 or 15 years of doing it a certain way served me, but now it's time to grow in a new direction or do something. And I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Because I do think that when we center ourselves as part of the equation, we don't want that anything can be overdone.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's this little spark and this little like magic piece of this to explore.
Well, part of it is our life force, that energy inside of us that wants to move and be expressed. And I feel like through suppression of that creates depression and lack of energy and lack of movement and having to feel conformed and straitjacketed.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I am really curious about that.
Yeah. I got big mad with you, which for me was a really healthy thing. I think it probably could have come early. when I say it could have come earlier in our relationship, I think we're exactly where we need to be. I think it's been a long time for us to have gone without having as much conflict as we've had recently. And I'm not judging it. I'm just naming that. We worked through that, and then you got big mad at me,
Mm-hmm.
and you and I, we worked through it, but we had a very different perception of what needed to happen afterwards. So we worked through that. And in the meantime, with this OCD stuff for me, as I'm talking with my coach about it and recognizing how, when I'm activated, how incredibly preoccupied I am. I mean, it is pretty much constant. And I spent, I think, a couple of days just being aware of how constant it was. And in this moment, that there's a part of me reaching out to connect, to regulate with you, I think is part of the OCD lie. And the lie is, if I connect with Jen, then I will be regulated. And so I spent a couple days really working on what I'm calling closing the loop. It's not a loop that permanently closes. It closes and it opens and it closes and it opens. But I spent a couple days really working on closing that loop on my own and felt really proud and was able to kind of just be accountable for that. But what happened is, when we had time to reconnect, it had been a few days, and I 100% lose the connection between us. You thought I was angry, and it's very possible that there was anger there. And for me, I just feel so disconnected. And part of the work that I'm doing with the OCD, it's called ICBT, where you look at what the wound is underneath it. And so a lot of that wound has to do with my original trauma of, I don't matter, I don't belong, there's no room for me, I'm not connected, I'm invisible, I disappear when we're not connected. Like, I have such a hard time maintaining that sense of belonging and connection with you on a heart level. And so since I made that realization, and that was just this week, I've just been really curious about it and then trying to figure out, how do I hold on to that connection, and seeing all the little lies and the ways that the OCD wants to pull me back in when I think I'm looking at data or I'm reviewing something like that, as a hook that will take me down a spiral. And so finding a way to recognize that that's going on, but not get pulled in that direction, but also not have the fear of, because I've had some relief. I've had some relief from the OCD. I've been feeling connected to you. I've been making a conscious choice to reach out more than I would. It's hard for me to take up space and to just spontaneous. Like, I think this is probably one of the first few times that I FaceTime you without texting you first for permission. Like, I think if you're neurodivergent, you have trauma, you have the wound of too much. So that thing of having needs, taking up space can just be really, really challenging. And the converse of the too much is the not enough. And so it's challenging for me. And I don't know if this is the OCD thought in my mind, because we had a 2-week period where I stayed very connected to you and very regulated. But it's possible that that was an OCD connection, that like it put the OCD at bay because I was connecting with you. Like, I don't know. But there is this little thing in the back of my head that's like, okay, we've been here before. Like, how long can we go with this before I feel this disconnection? And then you and I have to do repair work. And reminding myself, like, we're going to do repair work as much as we need to as I work through this, because I don't know what the flip I'm doing. And my therapist or my coach is doing some training. So instead of meeting, 5 weeks this month, we are meeting 2 out of the 5 weeks. So I'm having to do a lot of this on my own without having a lot of guidance, because we're just starting to work on, how do I navigate and manage this stuff?
Yeah, I love the questions that you're asking. I mean, I love questions better than answers anyway. And this finding your way, I know I've certainly had a version of that attachment injury where it's like object permanence isn't there. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
literally feels developmental.
But it's not like when I reconnect with you, I go like, oh, we're connected.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I lose that, and we almost have to start over
Mm-hmm.
again for me to get that connection.
Mm-hmm. I just want to
Yeah.
validate that. Like, after a storm blows through, like, it does feel like, ooh, when will we get back to normal? And the fear of, oh my God, will we ever? Like, I know there have been times where you and I like are looking at each other, and then somehow by the end of the conversation, where I think last time we did it, I was like chit chat. Right? I was like, when do we just get back
Mm-hmm.
to like our kind of normal chit
Right.
chat? And I think it just, there are certain things that just sort of feel I don't know if it's strange in our bodies, or I know let me just speak for myself, right? Like, okay, this something just happened, and where's it going to go, and what's going to happen, and I think the tricky thing with the if onlys, right? The if only we do this right, then we're never going to have to do it again.
Right.
And that's one that I have to catch myself on. And I usually just remind myself that this is life, and rupture and repair is a part of every really significant relationship, right? And I've had significant relationships in my life where I didn't risk the rupture and repair, and those relationships have suffered. There's
Yeah.
just a wedge or an impasse or
Yeah.
that it feels really hard to bridge. So I'd almost rather be doing some of that work. And we all have a lot of unconscious, like unexamined assumptions about that. Like, I had a significant relationship where it was like, no, that fight shouldn't happen. And if you have something that feels good as far as repair, that's just going to reinforce the fact that the disconnect happened, and you don't want to do that. And I mean, I understand the logic, but I think the application, I know in my lived experience, did not work for that relationship. So this idea of if only ... fill in the blank, if only this wouldn't happen, life wouldn't be hard, I wouldn't feel big uncomfortable feelings. To me, that's like immediately
Right.
suspect. That's like, okay, what's going on there? We might call that a dead guy goal. It's like, if it's easier for a dead guy to pull off, then
Right.
it's silly. But I think about brushing my teeth. I think
Mm-hmm.
about, none of us get to this place where, like, okay, I did it once. If only I brush my teeth right, I'll never have to brush them again. Like, none of us carry that expectation. We know that it's
Right.
this practice, right? A daily practice, a relational practice of showing up, risking it. And I have taken that path where I'm not, if I'm not willing to risk, and then the relationship drifts apart, where the person can't make space for me to take those risks, or whatever. And I think, the degree that that's true for someone, maybe the degree that, you're a deep thinker, deep feeler, wanting, craving the connection of processing something challenging together. One of the things I love is wondering and pondering and, just sharing, ooh, what's that's coming up, and
Yeah.
while I know it's been difficult, and I don't clearly, I mean, I think, one of the things that was underlying my big mad was this idea that, I was doing something to cause someone I love pain. That, I
Mm-hmm.
think, was one of the narrative type triggers,
Yeah.
which then I was sort of railing against a little. I don't relish that part of it, but yet, I don't know. It's like walking through life expecting not to get a paper cut or something. Like, they're gonna
Right.
happen. And
Right.
how skilled can we be?
Right. So I'm going to share something, and I'm not expecting you to respond because I want to be respectful about where you're at. Are you okay with that?
Thank you. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure. That part of what you and I are both coming up against, or not, I don't think it's against, but is being more authentic. And when, after you had this big mad and then we reconnected, you were fine and ready to move on. And I had a very different perspective of what had happened. So it took me a really long time to warm up. And I think that I played this kind of how I'm socialized. I'm a well socialized female of be polite and listen. And then when I finally said, like, can I just say what's going on? And it felt a little salty to me, that I think that's when things started to shift. And so you and I are talking about, I have much more safety when you set boundaries and you're clear about what you can and can't do. Or if you're not sure and you're saying, I'm not sure, because part of what we're exploring is how much of what's going on with me do you want to be hearing? And some of it you're not sure, and some of it you don't want to hear, which is okay. We've never been here before and we don't know. But I would much rather hear a no and be very clear about it, because what I suspect happens, are you okay? We've talked about this, but are you okay with me sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking
Okay.
about, I'm just like having my own thought responses. But no, you're great.
Okay.
Keep going.
Is that I think sometimes I'm wanting things and I think your persona is to want to be agreeable and to meet those needs, but I'm not sure that that really works for you. And then what happens is you end up sort of not showing up literally or emotionally because I don't know that you were fully on board without, I don't think any of this is intentional, but then I feel that distance and withdrawal, and that touches on my OCD and my sense of you pulling back and not being connected. And I don't think we do any of this consciously, but if there were an ideal way to construct it, if you're, and I'm not putting this on you, this is true for me too, but if you're clear about what works and what doesn't, and we know that up front, then I know what I'm working with. That container is there and I can move around more easily, as opposed to, I don't know, and then I'm feeling something shifting. I think also being autistic, that I get confused and I feel something and I thought it was going to go one way and it didn't. And then I don't know what to do with that. And then trying to manage that unknown it can be very dysregulating for me. It's my job to take care of it. But we have this idea of I want to be nice and I don't want to say no, but often that can be more harmful than upfront saying, this doesn't work or this is what I can give. And I'm not putting this all on you, just for the sake of conversation. It's easier to talk about it in this context.
No, I totally understand. And I don't think I've ever spoken this part, what just kind of occurred to me. But I don't know at this point. I should sit down and figure it out, like how many hours I've clocked relationally, right, as a therapist, where like, I'm here, I got you, I'm not going to take this personally. And I was just realizing how that might dovetail. And I have not asked you for the same level of consent in this conversation that you keep checking in with me about, but okay. And plus, we can always edit it out, right? Not that we have ever really done that, but it's always an option. What I was going to say is, I know and thank you for inviting me. You and another really important person in my life right now have made it very clear that you want me a little salty sometimes. Like, you really
absolutely
want that. And I have my own journey with that and what makes that feel scary. And, being able to speak openly to both of you about it is really important. But what was occurring to me was, one of the things I got salty about a little bit was like, if you're wanting that connection, like reach out to me, like take some accountability for that part of it. But what just occurred to me is the dovetailing of, if I'm showing up in this way had you asked me, hey, Jen, are you being authentic? I would have said, oh, absolutely. But as I'm going through some transformation, what's really authentic change? Like, everything's a moving target at the moment.
Right. Right.
Now I'm like, oh, like that wouldn't fit for me now if I'm growing in this way, where relationally, I don't want to show up as much as a therapist in my closest friendships. Now, I've had several earlier in my life, huge chunks of my life, thinking 15 plus years, 20 years, of where that was really working for the person. And that's what they wanted me to show up as. And I have met very sharply with the limits here in midlife of what that would do to me, right? And why that's such a bad idea. But where I was going was me sort of trying to embody this wish granting fairy energy of just being accommodating and being here for you. And I got this. And then I think what started, if I track it, I'm thinking, well, I was losing capacity, not able to do that. And here I'm thinking, ooh, I just need better self-care. But I think it was a growth spurt that I'm really being invited in my closest relationships to. Of course, I still want to lead with like kindness and understanding and all of that, but I need to have needs and show up where more authentically. And so that the saltiness, right? But I would need to take accountability. Like, we co-created that. And I was, as much as you were maybe wanting someone that could just, and I think you've discussed this on the podcast, just anticipate your needs and just do it. I was just as complacent in trying to be that person for a while there. And then it's like building a tower of blocks, and they all sort of come tumbling down at a certain point because you're ready to build something else, right? You're ready for that, whatever that next stage is. And it is natural. And it, my growth game's always been pretty strong. And here's the next iteration. And I'm just glad that we can be on the ride together, because things are dynamic and they do change.
And I think that that's pretty common that we set up these dynamics in relationships. We have these unspoken contracts. And I think sometimes that's why I don't think anger is a bad thing. I don't think my big mad or your big mad is a negative thing. And there was something that you said when you were angry that kind of got my attention, and it's really stuck with me, so that when I start to get into that OCD loop, what you said is reality. And because the OCD is so full of lies, that I have that kind of reality of what you said, that kind of, it's like a bumper. I use the word container, but like it's a bumper that creates safety.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want you to be complacent. And if things are bumping up, I want to hear that. And the same thing, that I want to have the freedom too. But I think, again, we're so socialized. And then if we're therapists, that we're so good at just holding all that stuff in and kind of going, and lacking some of that authenticity. And you and I had talked before we started recording that, when I identified as an HSP and I looked at autism, I'm like, that is not me. I was deeply offended when people said that HSPs are just autistic. And now the reality is I am autistic. And I wouldn't have identified with that our identities, how we show up. I don't think I would have thought that I had attachment injuries when you and I started our friendship. I do want to say one thing, that, and I haven't sorted this one out, that it is my responsibility to reach out when I need connection. What I'm finding is it's very hard for me to figure out when to do that, because until last week, by the time I would let you know that I was very dysregulated, it was too late. And when I get dysregulated, then I feel really unable to reach out because it just grabs me. And I'm doing this dance right now of like, is this my need to connect and do I need to reach out? Is this my OCD? And I don't have an answer for that. And so I'm really just trying to trust, and I don't have a clue.
I get it. Yeah. I don't know. I think sometimes that confusion, questioning, not knowing is such a fertile kind of space, and an
Yeah.
important part of the process, and we hate it.
Yeah. And I feel that's been a big part of our conversations over the last 3 weeks or so, when I'm dysregulated and I'm crying or I'm coming out of anger and like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if this is my OCD. I don't know if this is a valid thing. And I know that the OCD today it will say, Jen, if you love me, you would do this. And tomorrow it's like, but if you love me, you would do that. And then the next day it's something else. And it's very hard for me to trust, is this a need or is this the OCD talking, because of the very unrealistic expectations and the lies. It's just so pernicious.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that's, you're discussing specifically OCD right now, which I know can be very sharp. And, oh, gosh, talk about something that can really grab you. But I almost feel like every narrative we tell ourselves should have a grain of salt, right? Because the context matters. Like my narrative that it's not safe or okay to me to be angry, that was born out of a situation where that was absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
And the context matters. Right? So there's other,
Right.
like the feedback I'm getting, like I'm almost like scratching my head in disbelief. I'm like, really? And yet I know it because I can feel it too. As
Right.
the sort of dance goes on and the dynamic goes on, that it's an important piece of being human. And for as much as I'm like, oh, yeah, I've known intellectually, like health is wholeness, right? It's like, oof, but this too. So I'm so
Yeah.
curious about the things that we, if only, about, because
Yeah.
maybe equanimity is like it's meant to be included.
Yeah. Part of my homework is to do writing about, like, if something happened, then what would happen, to just start getting clear about what are the needs that are driving this underneath. And I have been, the other thing is somatically what goes on in my body. And I'm starting to get clues on, I'm dysregulated. Oh, this is moving into, I have to do something. And if I'm processing on my own, it usually means I need to have a good cry and then do some parts work, and just starting to pay attention to what those things are. So just trying to get information and be curious,
Yep.
and to try and lean into accepting what's going on. I can feel there is a little bit of fear building up of like, okay, I've been in a good place for 2 days and I felt not good place. I've been feeling very regulated. And so that fear. I would imagine it's similar to having panic attacks of like, oh my gosh, the last time I had a panic attack, I was here and I have to go there again. And what if I get one? And
Yeah.
so just really trying to lean in and trust that we will recycle through this stuff as many times as we need to. And I think when I can allow that to be the baseline, because I have said to you when I'm very dysregulated and thinking that you're the connection of like, I don't want to need you. I don't want to co-regulate. This pisses me off. I don't want to be here. I mean, like, this is just the mess.
Mm-hmm.
It's the reality.
Yeah. I really resonated with something you were saying about panic because I do have a history of panic attacks, and I know the turning point. And a lot of this comes out of my, acceptance and commitment therapy training, which was like as a baby therapist, that was my modality that I was first trained in. So it's just kind of baked into me. It was when, I'm not going to get to the end of my life without several more panic attacks, most likely.
Right.
And I know how to navigate them now.
Right.
That I know what to do. So you just, you did just state, here's a personal protocol for what I'm going to do in this thing.
Yeah.
It feels like an external pernicious influence. I'm not sure how external or internal it is, but it's like, comes and gets you. And the more willing you are to have it, the less generally frequent, intense, and how duration, right? How long it lasts. We start to see all those things kind of track down a little bit. And 1,000%, I'm here for it. Here on the journey with you, my friend. We can recycle and reprocess as much as we need to. And I'm also learning really valuable lessons in like, what's the difference between what's healthy versus what can get toxic or needs to be boundaried, and I think both of us are in a lot of my current relationships, and I'm learning the ones that really do need the boundaries that are more where it's less reciprocal or curious or open to processing and figuring it out versus what's just really healthy. And that's not answers and having it all figured out. It's really having a process, certain values, and being with this messy business of being human, really.
Yeah. We probably should wrap up. Is there anything else before we
I don't think so, my dear. No, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. All right. I appreciate you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Hey again. So I'm curious to know what you thought. Did that resonate? What sets with you? I think I'm going to start with the easier thing first. The other thing just happened, so I'm not even sure how to process it. One of the things that I didn't talk about much during this episode that I wanted to is I've been talking with my coach, and I've been really mindful about making sure that I move my body. My goal is 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. This is because it regulates my system, not for any other reason. The reality is I often get from 30 minutes to 2 hours a day if I'm paddling or we take the dogs to Shelter Island and then we walk them again at night, or I do aquafit, which is over an hour, and then I walk the dogs. But I need that bare minimum just because it regulates my body. Unfortunately, what happens is when I am really struggling with my OCD, my mind is not clear when I move my body. For some people, when they move their body, they just get into the flow and their mind relaxes and they get a break mentally from what's going on. That generally does not happen. And I will often find myself, I did a 5.6 mile solo paddle on Sunday, and this was after Jen's big mad. So part of me was processing it, and then I'd get a thought and I'd identify that's an OCD thought. Oh, I'm looping again. And then I would put my hands into the water with each stroke. I had my Greenland paddle. If you're a paddler, you can get your hands in the water when you paddle so that I could feel the water. And then I would sing a song and start humming because that settles your vagus nerve, which can calm your nervous system. But there really wasn't, and I was out on the water for, I don't know, maybe an hour and 40 minutes. There was very little of that time that I was really in the moment, enjoying the experience. I love being on the water. I love the feel of the water on my hands. It was a hot day. I kept pouring water down my neck and down my life vest. And it's not that I did not enjoy paddling. I did, but the OCD really made it challenging for me to be in the moment and enjoy the experience. So I got a great physical release from doing this paddling. I loved being out on the water, but I did not get much relief in my brain. So part of what my coach and I talked about are what are ways that I can get relief, and your brain can only solve one problem at a time. I love doing logic books and logic puzzles. And when I was getting ready to apply for graduate school, I had to take, it's called the GRE. And one of the sections was on logic, which was not required for my major, but I love doing the logic problems. So we talked about, can I do Sudoku? Can I do puzzles on my phone? Can I do some logic problems? So I ordered a logic book. I've been crocheting, and that often helps because I need to count stitches, and I watch TV and I crochet. I didn't realize that I love listening to books on tape that are fictional stories, not self-help books, but fictional stories. And there's an author that I love. Her name is Catherine Ryan Hyde. I think it's Ryanhyde. And she has a bunch of books, and they're all about people with deep feelings that, I'm listening to a story right now. I don't know what it's called, but it's about a little girl whose mom is struggling with addiction. She lives in this apartment building, and everybody kind of steps up to really meet her needs because her mom can't. I love her books, and I'd forgotten how much I love them. The reason why I'm telling you this is I get this sense of I feel like I'm a kid and someone is telling me a story when I listen to these books on tape or Audible. And I'm finding that I like to listen to them at night while I'm getting ready. I like to listen to them when I crochet. And it almost feels like co-regulation for me. And I was going to cancel my Audible membership because I bought it to get some self-help books on autism that I wanted to listen to that I'm just struggling to get through. But I love hearing stories. And when I'm listening to a story, my mind relaxes because I'm in this world with these characters. We talked about maybe getting a jigsaw puzzle to put out on the table. I haven't put one out yet. That's a possibility. We talked about Sudoku. I know being outside and getting my feet barefoot in the grass helps. Being at the beach with my feet in the sand or in the water helps. Being in the water helps. I'm talking about suggestions so that if you struggle with some of these things, these may be some solutions for you. So it feels like for me, I need to take a two-pronged approach where I'm dealing with the stress in my body and also finding ways to relax my mind. It's not uncommon for us to rewatch programs that we've seen before because they're predictable and our mind can relax. I often like finding series that have many, many seasons to them because I like getting into the rhythm of the show. And it's hard when the show ends because then I have to make new movie friends. But these are things that might be helpful for you. And then because I was feeling regulated, I actually had 2 days, yesterday in Aquafit, and today we took the dogs to Fiesta Island, that I was in the moment and really enjoying and feeling joy about what I was experiencing, what I was seeing, and I was not preoccupied and the OCD was not running in my mind, which I am incredibly grateful for. Now, when Jen and I stopped recording, I didn't think anything was going on with me. Jen's had a lot, so I've just been kind of very supportive. And then I started to tell her, I asked, do you have the capacity to hear this? And can I process a little bit about what's been going on with me? And she said, yes. And I got tearful and I said, I'm feeling afraid because I've had these 2 days where I have not been preoccupied, but historically it doesn't last. And I can't tell if this is an OCD lie in my head or if this is what I'm needing. And it feels like today that when I can connect with her in the morning, it reminds me that I'm connected, that she cares about me, that I belong, that I matter. This is not Jen's responsibility. This is from a wound from childhood, and I can manage this on my own. And after Jen got big mad, it took a couple days before we could connect, and I was able to self-regulate, talk myself through it, do parts work, cry, do everything that I needed to do. I know I can do it. But at this point, I am unable to maintain that sense of connection with her, that I matter, that I belong, that we are okay in our relationship. It's like I can do one, but not the other. Again, if this is OCD, if this doesn't work for either one of us, we will change this. But I talked to her about, does it work if I text you in the morning or I call you or I connect with you? And she's totally fine with it. But then I started to cry because it feels like a really, really big ask from my perspective. Now, if she asked this of me, I don't think I'd think anything of it. I'd be like, yeah, I'm here for it. I'm here for it all. From my perspective, it felt really huge. And our agreement is that as on me to do that connecting if I need to. But what I asked is, I don't want it to be that I'm the only one that has to do it. And so we talked about what that might look like. This can change. This could be my OCD. It could be that this is what makes me feel regulated and we do this for the rest of our lives. And if it works for both of us, then we do it. I mean, I honestly don't know. I feel like I am walking in unknown territory, and without the guidance right now of my coach and really understanding my OCD, this is the best that I have. And the other thing that we talked about is generally by the time I realize that I'm dysregulated, we have to do rupture and repair work. And so I'm not able to tell when a thought is something that I need to work with or express and when I just need to let it go. And this morning is kind of an example. I feel pretty vulnerable sharing this with you, but I guess I've been doing this a long time. Jen and I connected this morning via FaceTime. And then I had this feeling during the morning of like, oh, I want more. It wasn't very strong, but it's like, oh, I want more connection. But I was able to let it go. And then I went on with my morning and was not preoccupied, and it was fine. Sometimes I tell myself, like, I know I can manage, like, I'm not going to be able to connect to Jen all the time, and it's fine. And so what we talked about is maybe when the thought is persistent and it doesn't go away, that's a time to reach out and let her know what I'm, what's going on and what I'm needing. Because by the time I try and sit with it and manage and self-regulate, by the time I reach out to her, I'm dysregulated. And like I said, we have to do repair work. So I feel like I want to say F if I know, and we're in uncharted territory. I think Jen's capacity for my need to connect is much greater than me feeling like it's okay. And we're just going to have to keep working on this. And as long as I'm regulated, I can reach out and connect with her. The challenge is that if I try and manage it on my own and it doesn't go away and I become dysregulated, then we have to do that repair work. And that makes it a little bit tough. So I think that is pretty much what I have to say. If you want to work with Jen, you can reach her at jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com. If you want to work with me, you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. Thank you so much for all of the comments on Spotify, the emails that you're sending. I really have been doubting, and Jen and I were talking because it's just not working for us to connect and record. I'm doing more solo episodes. I'm having a little bit of doubt about, is this helpful? I'm just stuck in, talking about what's been going on and is this helpful? So when you do reach out to me and send emails letting me know how you're being affected, it really means a lot to me. And it reinforces the idea that this is really valuable stuff that Jen and I have to share that I don't think you can find in a lot of places. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how your brain is wired. You have a right to be dysregulated. You have a right to be needy. You have a right to want connection. You have a right to have joy and peace. It's okay to have hard conversations. It's okay to not want to have hard conversations. You are not for everybody, and everyone's not for you. And when you find your people, you will know that you find your people. We can do repair work and conflict with some people. We can't do it with everybody. Ideally, we find places where we can unmask and be loud and noisy and jiggly wiggly and silly and vocal and stimmy, and we get that sense of relaxation. We can't always do that everywhere, and I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry that the world is not accommodating to meet our neurodivergent needs. I think that's all I have for y'all. Have a blessed day.